let's meet our guest speaker for tonight, Amy Morris. Amy Morris is a recent graduate from the College of Arts and Humanities here at CWU, earning a BA in both public relations and digital journalism. She also minored in nonprofit organizational management. During her time at CU, she was editor for The Observer and a social media coordinator for the Wildcat Shop. She was also a member of SWAP, Her Campus, AUAP, and 88.1 The Berg. Since graduating college, she has been working as a communications coordinator for a nonprofit that helps families experiencing homelessness. Amy has always had a great passion for nonprofit work while applying her skills and making a positive impact. We are so excited to have you back with us tonight, Amy, and with that, I'll pass the mic on to you.
Sweet. Okay, I'm going to share my PowerPoint. Okay, sweet. So I'm going to be talking about expectations versus reality of working in the nonprofit field / like your first job. Because I did want to make this like very general and not like organization specific, since it is all my own like experiences and my own like opinions as well. So I wanted to start off just by like going over my like position and kind of like the different duties I have, because I feel like communications coordinator is like a very, I don't know, like broad title, and not everyone knows what it means. Like when I was in school, I didn't necessarily know like what I would go into, because there's like PR specialist, marketing specialist, social media coordinator, and they're all like very similar, just with like different titles. So this is like an overview, and I'll go like more into depth in like the slides to come of like basically what I do. So email marketing is like a huge part of my job. I honestly didn't think I would spend so much time doing like emails, which is interesting. And then social media, as most people know, like basically every company has some social media presence. So that's also something that falls under me. Doing appeals, also something I actually had like no idea what it was for this position, but that's like a huge part of fundraising, and a big part of my job too. Designing promo material, managing ads, and then lastly, coordinating with the printer. This is also something that I didn't really have experience doing and is a big part of my job, but I'll go into that later. So I wanted to start with email marketing and social media. So I don't know how many people here have used like Constant Contact. I had never even heard of it before this job, but it is like probably like the biggest tool I use in my job. It's basically just lets you send out mass emails. So I have a picture of it here. It's super easy to use. You kind of just drag and drop like different design elements into it, and then you can link to like registration forms or like link donations, whatever you want. It's super easy to use. But the part that I didn't really have any experience in or didn't even really think about is pulling email lists. And that's something that's so like time consuming. I'm not the one who pulls them. We have a database person who does it, but you have to think like very like in detail about who you want each email to go out to. So you have to like, for example, like, do you want it to go out to donors who have given in the past like 2 years, or only monthly donors, or major donors who give like large sums of money, or volunteers? Like there's so many different donor categories. And I feel like every organization uses like some sort of database. So we use Donor Perfect. And it's basically how we keep track of all the different donors that come into our system and like how much they donate. So it can be tricky, like deciding from that like huge database who we want each email to go out to. And then I have e-versions here just because for every print material that goes out, there's also like an email version also. But I'll go into detail about what materials I send out later. And then moving on to social media. So as most, like I said before, most companies have a social media. And this part can be kind of, I don't know, tricky for me, because I know I've talked about it in I think I've talked about in a presentation in this club before, but like some organizations don't realize like how much work social media is. Like it's so like time consuming. So it can be hard to do when I have like so many other like stuff on my plate, like so many other projects. Because there are companies out there who have like a whole team of just social media people. So that can be tricky to manage. But I just want to go over like a couple of the main like content we post that is more specific to nonprofits. So where I work, we have 2 volunteer coordinators. So they are constantly sending me like different pictures of volunteers to post. So for example, like if a volunteer made blankets to give to our families, or if they made like home cooked meals, or even just like weekly volunteers. Basically, each time we have an interaction with like a volunteer or a donor, we make a post about it, because those are like the 2 main things that keep like a nonprofit running, or like volunteers and donors. Especially for major donors, we always want to make sure to post about them, especially if they like gave like a large check, or if we have like a strong partnership with them and they're like constantly promoting us, we want to like promote them back. Or even if it's just like people from the community who like drop off like cans of food or clothing or whatever it may be, like we always take a picture of them and then post about it. And then the last like category is like partnerships. So grants. Most nonprofits, well, probably all of them, have like a lot of grants. And sometimes for those grants, you have to like promote them or like have specific parameters for like different social media posts to do about it. So like, for example, I have like 3 different like grant projects that all require like different social media stuff that I have to do for them. So all of that is like pretty time consuming, but we also do like the regular posts too that most companies do, like for major holidays or just fun posts, that sort of thing. But those are just kind of the main content. And then for managing ads, that's another thing that I do in my job. So social media ads like Facebook and Instagram, those are pretty straightforward. Even if you have never done one before, it's like pretty easy to like figure out. Radio ads, I've done one of those so far. It was just like a 30-second ad, and I wrote the radio script for it, and then I got to choose who I wanted to voice it. They even gave me the option to voice it, but I was like, no. But I chose this woman to voice it, and then this cute little kid, so that was fun. I don't know how many people here have taken Central News Watch, but that class is honestly very helpful to like know how to like time stuff up perfectly, like video packages. So that was like super helpful in like writing a radio script, because you only have like 30 seconds to like cram all the information you need into it. So you have to be like very concise with your wording. But that was a lot of fun. And then I also do magazine and newspaper ads. At least for every event we do, we have an ad that goes out in this magazine, and it's basically just has event details in it. And then also we have our sponsorships on there too, as a way to like promote them and like honor them for their contribution. And those can be very time consuming too, just like designing it, because you obviously have to choose like, do you want like a full page or a half page, or like what design like do you want for the ad. And then I'm always the one who has to design like each piece of material that goes out. So that's also another thing that takes a while to do. And then event calendars. This is something that's free, and I think it's a super good resource to use. There's like so many local pages out there that will let you like post events on it for free or information. Like the Chamber of Commerce, you can post different events on there. So that's always a good tool to use. You can also hand out like flyers. That's also something super easy to do to like different coffee shops or businesses, whether it's like a flyer for an event you're doing, or just like a trifold that has like information about your organization. That's always something easy to do. And then I wanted to go more in depth into appeals as well, just because that's like such like a staple of like fundraising. So if you work in fundraising, especially in the communications department, it'll probably fall on you to like know how to write an appeal or to edit an appeal, that sort of thing. So I have like a super brief kind of definition of what it is. So it's like describing a need, telling a story, and making an ask. So for example, in my case, you would describe like, there are families out there who are like cold and hungry, they have no safe place to go, like describing the need present, and then going into a direct story. So like there's a mom named Grace, she has 2 kids, she has nowhere to go, like tell a very specific story about like a person you served. And then you go into making an ask, like, thanks to you, Grace and her kids were able to find a housing. But there's still a lot of families out there who have not found housing. Like by donating $60 today, you're providing a night of safety. So it kind of follows just that like template. And it's basically just like a way to tug at that emotional side, to make people like compelled to donate. So there's always a print piece that goes out of it. Appeals are usually just one-sided, just like one single page. And then there's a couple of emails that go out for each appeal as well, maybe 3 to 4, sometimes even 6 emails. It kind of depends how long the appeal is. And then also there's like a couple of social media posts I do as well that pulls content out of that appeal, just to hit like all those different audiences of people who would like likely donate. And then these occur a lot. So they occur at least for every season, like a fall appeal, a winter appeal, a spring appeal, but especially for major holidays. So we'll have like a Thanksgiving appeal and a Christmas appeal, because people are most like compelled to donate during the holiday season. People want to give back. So those are like huge like donation points. And then also if there's an urgent need, I put out an urgent need appeal like a couple days ago actually, because it was snowing a little bit, and it's also been at like during the 20s at night, so there'd be an urgent need there. That their families are out in the cold and they need shelter, like it's an immediate need that's happening. And then along with appeals, there's also other pieces of materials that go out that are like similar to it. So letters from the executive director. That's not necessarily like an appeal, but it's basically a way to kind of give a face to the organization, give different updates, like talk about accomplishments. Because obviously donors don't constantly want to be asked for money. That's just going to get annoying after a while. They also want to see like how their money is being used. They want to be thanked for their contribution. So it's important to like have a mix of like all of that. And then 2 pieces of statements that I didn't necessarily like even think would like fall into my position is creating the annual reports and then doing the tax statements. So the less like fun parts of the job. Most people I feel like know what an annual report is. It's basically something that happens yearly, a report that a nonprofit makes that kind of goes over their financial status, like how many people they served, their different accomplishments for the year, that sort of thing. So it takes a while to kind of pull that data from different departments, and then I have to edit it all together to look nice. So that's actually something I'm currently working on right now. And then the tax statements. This is something I didn't even like think about was a thing, but it makes sense that donors would want their tax statements, especially if they're like large donors to do taxes. So that's something that's also like a huge project and takes forever. Yes, so I wanted to go more into like detail about appeals just because I feel like I've learned a lot from doing them. So an example would be like I've always referred to, if I see someone on the streets, I would be like, oh, like there's a homeless person there, or like Seattle has a lot of homeless people. But I've learned to instead refer to them as people experiencing homelessness, just because using homeless as an adjective kind of like describes their essence, like describes like their entire being, but saying like this is a person experiencing homelessness just shows that this is something they're currently experiencing, like that's not their entire being, they're, you know, a person beyond just being homeless. So just like those small bits to kind of like think about, because while you want to make like the need present, whether that's like families experiencing homelessness, foster kids, like sexual assault survivors, like all of those people have like present needs. But you want to like remember they're people, they have feelings, they've often gone through like very traumatic experiences. So you want to present them in a way with like honor and dignity, because a lot of them like feel very ashamed of like what they're going through. So it's just important to show them in like a positive light. And another thing that goes like along with that is something like I didn't think about was it's important to like mask their identity, because a lot of people who end up experiencing homelessness is because they're fleeing like domestic violence, especially like when it's moms, single moms and kids, you know, they flee from a really bad situation and then they end up with nowhere to go. So they end up having to like live on the streets or in their cars. And often if we're telling a story about them, we don't want to use their actual name. We don't want to use the number of children we have, because just from even those like very small details, like their abuser could find them, especially if they know what area they're in. So it's important for us to always like tweet details like their name, you know, never show their actual picture either. We either always like crop their heads or we use stock photos, which stock photos are kind of like a whole thing in itself, like making sure to choose a stock photo that accurately like represents the people we're serving. So that can take a long time, and a lot of nonprofits do use stock photos when telling stories just because they obviously can't show the identity of the person they're serving. So that's something to be mindful of. And then moving on. So designing promo material and coordinating with the printer. And I honestly love designing. It's something I enjoy a lot. I actually really did not have to take any design classes for my major. So if you're going to the communications field, I suggest taking a design class, because everything you do, you'll probably have to design, whether that's social media posts, like different promo material that goes out. Knowing how to do that's important. The only reason I actually knew how to like design at all was from working at the Observer, because I had to learn how to use InDesign for that. And then along with that, just knowing all the Adobe products are a necessity. But yeah, designing is fun, but coordinating with the printer is probably my least favorite part of the job. Weirdly enough, I find it the most challenging part of my job, just because there's like such a tight timeline you have to plan out, from like collecting like visuals and materials to go through like rounds of edits and pulling like the email list by a certain date, and just like know like when the design has to be finalized, when it has to get to the printer, when you want it to drop in the mail. And then sometimes we want to add like personalizations to the mailings. So for example, for appeals that are going out to major donors, sometimes we'll want to have our executive director hand sign them, or we'll want to have volunteers hand sign envelopes, because people are more likely to open an envelope if it's hand signed, because then they're like, this is not spam, like someone took the time to write this. So all those small details are just things I have to like plan time wise. And also I never like the printer, coordinating with the printer is hard, because printing uses like such specific language. Because obviously there's the basics of like how many you want to print, the mailing list, but there's also a lot beyond that. Like the questions I asked, for example, they'll be like, oh, do you want this like postmarked or metered, or do you want first class stamps or nonprofit stamps? Like they asked so many questions that I like personally did not have a lot of experience knowing what those meant. So that was like my biggest learning curve. And I just want to pause for a moment before I went into my like last bit to see if anyone had questions so far. Okay.
I think I was
Amy,
gonna.
I do have a question. My name's Steve Lang. I'm the Assistant Director of Career Services
Hi.
over on the West Side. So my undergraduate degree was in journalism. So I know very well what you're talking about, working with printers and all that kind of stuff. But but that was long before we had desktop publishing. So I was cutting and pasting everything together. So so what I'm interested in is how much how much more do you wish you'd learned in school to be able to do this job? And the reason I ask that is because the most difficult class I took in journalism school was production for publication, understanding how to prepare something for publication. I struggled in that class because I didn't take it seriously. But when I got out of school and got into publishing, that was the information, and that was the most important information that I used in a lot of my jobs. So the question is, how much more do you think you would have really enjoyed learning about that in school?
Yeah, for sure. That's a good question. Because yeah, I feel like there's very like broad things I learned how to do in school. But like when it comes down to like specifics, like you were talking about, I would find it so helpful if I had taken a class in printing and like knowing that whole process and timeline and the kind of language they use. I don't know if that was even like a class offered, but it wasn't required for my major. But I definitely think that's something that, you know, people would benefit a lot from taking. Also like learning about like appeals, I feel like would have been useful, or even just like design classes I think are super helpful, because a lot of like these things aren't necessarily like required for majors, like the technical details, but it is, I feel like, very important to like learn.
So I'm just going to do a follow-up question. What do you, I guess, what do you think is the most important skill that you're using in your job that you maybe didn't get to utilize or practice enough in school?
That's a good question. Because I feel like a very big skill I'd use, but I did learn, is like writing. Writing's super important, but I would definitely say just the more technical side of it. Like along with printing, learning like how to use like databases, like actually learning how to like make sense out of like numbers, or like, for example, like I said, we use like Donor Perfect, never heard of it before. And sometimes they'll have to like pull different reports, like pull reports for like how appeals are performing or that sort of thing. Like there's so many different reports within that database, and I don't necessarily know how to like make sense of like those numbers all the time, or like just like learning more about like reports and what those numbers actually mean on like the technical side of things, I think would have been really helpful.
Okay, well, I will let you get on with your presentation. I think it's actually much easier now because you have so many applications that can help you do that. But anyway, I appreciate your answers. I'll let you get on with your presentation unless somebody else has another question.
Sweet, thank you. And I'll pause again for like questions at the end, but yeah.
Okay, because we're also getting some in the chat for you too, Amy.
Oh. Let me try and read it. So this person asked, what are your thoughts on the videos on Instagram about people giving homeless people money, or guests videoing their reactions? Do you think these influencers are wrong for doing this, taking into account what you have said about client privacy in bad situations they may be trying to get away from? Oh, I definitely know what you're talking about, because I'm pretty sure I'm following a TikToker that goes around doing that. Like he'll give away like money, like he'll record basically everything he's doing. So I feel like it kind of depends on the person, because there are people who like don't mind like being on video or don't mind being written about. Like for example, at our events, we'll have guest speakers of people who were once housed at our nonprofit and who have then like found permanent housing and like gone on to have like stable careers and a good life. Sometimes we'll invite them back to like guest speak and kind of go through the process and like how they're doing now, that sort of thing. So for some people, like they are very comfortable at talking about like their past and where they are now. And for some people, it's like super dramatic. You know, they don't want to relive it. They don't want to talk about. If our like diversion team reaches out to them about seeing the story, they don't answer or they say no. So I feel like it's very much like a case by case basis. I feel like influencers definitely shouldn't just record people if they don't know about it or just post about it without asking them permission. But if they do have permission, they say it's fine, then I think that's fine. Like it's good to spread awareness, but just making sure whoever is in that video or in that post is okay with it. And then someone asked what is the most difficult. Sorry, you can go ahead.
Sorry, I had a quick question. I was wondering if you would personally recommend classes, like taking classes in project management or IT or like databases or finance management. Would you recommend taking classes in any of those areas?
Yeah, I definitely think for sure that's like super helpful. Like project management is one of feel like the main skills you need to have in this job. And even like now I struggle with it. Like I have so many different projects I have to run that like overlap. So it's sometimes like really hard to know like, because sometimes they're all a priority, like they're all stuff that are going on like the same timeline. So just knowing how to manage your time good, and even what you said about like taking IT or database classes, it's not something I would have thought I knew. I'm like, oh, like I'm going to create a field where I'll be designing and doing marketing, but I never really thought about the IT side of it or the database side of it. That's honestly super helpful to know and really important. So yeah, I would recommend that. And then someone asked, what is the most difficult thing you had to do in your job? That's a good question. I think, because the thing about mine, I'm kind of on the back end, so it's not like I'm directly like working with like clients or anything like that. So I kind of do everything like on my own in a way. But I don't know if there's one specific thing that was like really hard, but I would say just like, and I'll go into this later, but it's very much like learning as I go. I kind of just like got thrown into it in a way, which I can just like move on to my next slide since I'm talking about it. There we go, challenges. You kind of led me right into my next slide, thank you. So not having like a training period, I would say that was really hard for me because like the first couple of weeks I had like nothing to do. Like we were so busy. Like the people there were so busy. Like I got hired in the middle of them like ramping up for an event, and they're also super short staffed. And the person in my position before me was no longer there, so there was no one to really train me of knowing how to do stuff. So it was like me having like nothing to do and then having like so much stuff to do all at once and not necessarily knowing how to do a lot of it. So it's very much like learning as I go. But yeah, so I kind of wanted to talk about just some of the challenges because I feel like there's so much pressure to like find the perfect job after you graduate. Like everyone will do those posts about like post-graduation plans and like landing with their dream company, but it's important to keep in mind that there are so many people who don't go straight into their field right away, or there's some people who get a job and then end up hating it. So, and they don't post about that. So I think it's just important to not put so much pressure on yourself. So that's why I want to talk about some of like the challenges, because it's not all like rainbows and butterflies. I'll be right back. Sorry, my cat is meowing so much. I'm just gonna let him out of my room. Okay, I'm back. Sorry. So being the youngest person in the office, I feel like this is something a lot of people experience. Because in like college, you're surrounded by people your own age, whether it's like in clubs, in classes, even off-campus jobs, like at grocery stores or like fast food places. I feel like a lot of the times you're surrounded by like peers, and people who are kind of going through the same like life experiences as your own. But when I first got hired, I was like, it was only me and this one other girl who got hired at the same time, who were around the same age, and everyone else was in like their late 30s and 40s and 60s. So I think that was just like I don't know, like something hard to deal with. Going from like constantly being surrounded by people my own age to now like going into like the corporate organizational world, where a lot of the times you will be the youngest person in the office, especially if you're just starting off, because you don't always like get that same respect as people who have been there for years, or even people who are new, who are a lot older and have a lot more experience. So that's something I have found challenging. And also just like different generational differences. Like Gen Z does not think the same way as millennials. Millennials don't think the same way as baby boomers. So just kind of like learning those different communication styles is something that has been kind of hard. And then company culture is another thing, just because you never really know how like an organization is going to be until you work there. Like, yeah, you can research them, you can look into them, but you don't really know how it's going to be until you work there. And that can just be like hard, I feel like, just because in a university there's so much like diversity of people with different backgrounds, different identities, different like majors of kind of goals they have for their lives and like what they want to do with their lives, to then going into like a company where like everyone is very similar, or there's not a lot of diversity, I guess, all the time, especially in a smaller organization. Like I'm sure in like big organizations like Google or Microsoft, there's a lot more like diversity. That's not like always the case. And also just dealing with like office politics can be hard sometimes, of like talking to people who maybe don't like have the same views as you or the same opinions, but obviously you're in an office setting and you don't want to like make a scene. So just those kind of challenges. And then feeling the burnout and pressure of just going to that first job and having like to deal with so much projects. And sometimes it can be really hard to have clear boundaries. Like sometimes I'll get calls on like the weekends or where I'm on like holiday break, like asking me to do stuff. And I'm like, no. It's just kind of hard going from like being in school and having all these different things to like work, like consuming your being. And also just feeling like the disconnect at times. And this depends on like what position you're in. But for me, I'm kind of on the back end. Like I said before, I'm not a case manager. I don't work one-on-one with clients. So it can be hard to kind of see the results of all of the work I'm doing. Because yeah, I'll see the numbers, but I won't see the actual like human like impact that I'm creating. So that can just be a disconnect that I feel. But yeah, that's pretty much the end of my presentation. I have this quote here because I keep hearing this song and I feel like it's very fitting. It's important just to like slow down and not put too much pressure on yourself. To like get your dream job right after college. Like you guys are all like so young, like there's such a big lifetime ahead. So I just think it's important to like not feel so much pressure and anxiety around like getting that perfect job. So that's all my presentation. And I just want to end if anyone had any questions. I think there's some in the chat. So the question said, with your journalistic background, did you ever conduct any informational interviews with career professionals to learn about an occupation or an employer from the inside out? Yeah, so are you talking about, so before I got this job, if I like conducted like interviews with people?
Yes, whether you know, since you were interested in a particular field, did you ever contact anybody to find out about how they got into their career, what they like about it, what they dislike about it, either their career or to interview anybody within a company while you're in school?
Yeah, for sure. So I know I did that. I think I had that assignment maybe a couple times, but I do remember there was one instance that I did it where I job shadowed someone. So I job shadowed this journalist in Ellensburg. I actually reached out to a couple of people, but I know people are busy and it's hard to get back to people. So I did this like whole interview and then also job shadowed her for the day. She works at, I totally forgot what it's called. That newspaper in Ellensburg, the Daily? No, I forgot what it's called. But she works there, and that was super fun just to get to hear. Because she was super young too. She was like straight out of college, and she moved to Ellensburg just for that job. And I was very much like kind of balancing like if I wanted to go into the journalism field or I wanted to go more into the PR field, because I wasn't really sure. And I know it can be hard to go from like doing PR to then going to journalism or vice versa. There's actually some feedback I got in my job is that sometimes I'm too like journalistic in my writing. Like I'm so used to just like writing the facts and they're like, no, like you need to do more storytelling. You need to be more emotional. I'm like, I can't. Like it's hard going from like journalism writing to then like PR writing since it is like different. So I definitely think it's,
okay, go ahead.
I definitely think it's super helpful, is all I was gonna say, to like job shadow people or reach out to people just to get that better idea.
I just wanted to follow up because that's great. So two things. One is, did job shadowing a journalist make you decide maybe that's not the direction you wanted to go?
Okay. Yeah, I think it was a combination. Yeah, of like job shadowing her, and also, I mean, I loved working at the Observer, one of my favorite jobs. That job actually made me realize like how much I love like designing and editing, but the journalism side of it, after a while, it's just, I mean, most journalists know like it's a burnout, like having to do like story after story and interviewing people and like getting sources. So I think, and especially even in the person I interviewed for the job shadow, she talked about like how much she can feel like the burnout. She's like constantly on the go, like constantly doing stories. She doesn't have any like downtime or free time. So for me, I was like, I feel like, I don't know, I feel like that would be like a very fast paced, like always on the go, like kind of job. And I was like, kind of want one that's more slow, that I can be maybe more creative in. So that's kind of why I decided to go the PR route. But I still really love journalism too. So
okay. Well, I'm just one final comment, and I think you have one or two more questions, maybe one or question in the chat, and maybe some other people want to ask a question. Is that the one thing that you mentioned that you didn't do a lot of information only just because you said a lot of people are busy, right? And they don't always get back to you.
Yeah.
One bit of advice that I want to give to everybody on this session this evening is be politely persistent. I have worked with students doing informational interviews to explore careers for 20 plus years. And with very few exceptions, if the students have been politely persistent, when they've finally gotten in touch with it, when the professionals have finally gotten back in touch with them, the professional says, thank you for being persistent. I really did want to talk to you. I just had other priorities. So if there's somebody you really want to talk to, just be politely persistent, and you will be amazed at how appreciative they are that you are interested in learning about what they're doing. So anyways, I want to thank you for that, Amy, and I'll be quiet now and let somebody else ask a question.
Yeah, I agree. I actually had this student from like New York randomly reached out to me on LinkedIn for wanting to do an assignment interviewing me, and I was like so busy, but it's still, and I ended up doing it obviously because I know how hard it can be to find someone, but it is, yeah, it's very flattering when someone like wants to like do their assignment on you too. So yeah. So someone, oh, go ahead.
I think we were about to do the same thing. There was a question in the chat from Alyssa that states, how do you deal with burnout? Is there anything that you do to help yourself bounce back?
That's a good question. Honestly, it can be hard at times because at the end of the day, when I have like a million things to do, I always leave work and I'm like, ugh, like so stressed out because I'm like, those things are all still waiting for me, especially just like being like an hourly staff, and like working with people who are non-hourly, like my manager, she's not hourly, she like works like all the time. So it can be hard to kind of just like balance that and getting all the work done within those set amount of hours, since I can't really do overtime. So I guess for me, I feel like it's just important to like center like your mind of like, what's the worst that can happen? Like if you're at the end of the day, if you're trying your best, if you're like doing all your assignments and like doing all your projects, then you're like fine. Like you're not going to be perfect at everything. You're not always going to get every assignment like finished by the end of the day. But just like relaxing and like taking time to really like reflect on yourself. For me, something that's really helpful is just like going on a run or going on walks. Like after being like on a computer all day, like editing and designing and social media, and then coming home and then being back on like my computer and social media, even if it's like for my personal life, I still will feel like stressed out or high strung. So just like putting the electronics down and not like talking to anyone and just going for like a walk, just like think is like super helpful. So another question. Is there any more questions?
I have a couple. So the first question I'll ask is, what was your role as an officer in SWAP, and how did your role as an officer impact you? What was your role as an officer in SWAP, and how did your role as an officer impact your after college and your career?
Yeah. Also, thank you for everyone who said they liked my presentation. I really dropped out, but thank you. Yeah, so my position at SWAP was, I don't know the specific one, but like social media coordinator, just like managing the SWAP social media. And I feel like that's so helpful. Like, even if you can't, because you can't always, like for me, I did end up having social media coordinating jobs on campus, but not everyone can. So I feel like even just doing social media for a club is just so helpful in like learning those skills of how to like promote different things or like boost posts, or you know, knowing like who to follow and who to engage with. So I think that's so helpful. I would definitely recommend anyone who is going to communications to find some sort of outlet to like gain that experience from, even if it's not a job, because it really helps.
All right, awesome. And my second question is, has your experience in nonprofit exceeded your expectations? Has it surprised you, or has it altered your viewpoint of a career in nonprofit?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I honestly, there's a lot of things I didn't expect. Like, I think it's funny because a lot of people have like, I don't know, imposter syndrome. I've heard a lot, like people graduate and they feel imposter syndrome. But for me, it was kind of the opposite. I actually felt like, I don't know, like well prepared. Like I felt like I had like the skills I needed for this position. So I think in a lot of ways, like my expectations like were met. Like I knew what I was going into, but then in other areas, it like wasn't, kind of like what I talked about, like the very like analytical or technical side of some of my job duties are things that like I have struggled with, or just like company culture. But I think just working in the nonprofit as a whole, I think it's like, I obviously still want to work in the nonprofit field, and I think for the most part, it has met my expectations. But I have learned so much for like fundraising though. Like, even though I had experience in like social media coordinating and promoting stuff, I didn't have any experience really like working at a nonprofit and doing donor relations or any of that. So that's all something that was new to me. And yes, like Jamie commented, doing doing different like nonprofit workshops definitely helped me a lot too. Just like even ones like this, like getting to like hear from different like leaders in the nonprofit field and what they did and kind of like the different jobs out there is like super helpful as well. So, is there any other questions? Or
I did have a question.
yes.
Oh gosh, and I think it just left me. That's so embarrassing, you know, it comes in and then it
That's a
just
fleeting
completely
question.
disappears.
Deanna has one.
But I think Deanna just asked, what do you think your next job will be?
That's a good question. I mean, I never thought like necessarily that I'd stay at the one I had for a very long time, which I mean, most people don't. Like your first entry job, unless they're super lucky and like found one you want to spend like the rest of your life at, which is great. But most people don't stay at like their first entry level job like that long. But I would say I want to like stay in the same lane of like nonprofit work, marketing work, but I would say more geared to, I don't know, like more diversity, like an organization that does more for like inclusion and diversity and that sort of thing. Even though I love like obviously serving like families experiencing homelessness and that sort of thing, I feel like I'm looking for, I don't know, like a job that has that sort of like company culture that's very like inclusive, because that's like super important to me. But for the most part, like I do like my job duties a lot.
I remembered my question.
Yes.
So we both kind of entered the industry at the same time, leaving Central.
Oh.
And I think just like you, I never realized how much time my job would be spent doing like emails, but I also didn't realize how much time my job would be spent like in meetings and talking about doing things with other people.
Yeah.
And I realized I kind of like missed out on an opportunity, especially with group projects or like group work, to really embrace figuring out that dynamic. How would you advise college students to kind of prepare for that dynamic in like their career?
For sure, it can be like difficult, because for me, I actually love like group projects, except for when people like didn't do any work and then you're left with like the one who did everything. But I honestly love like getting to work with different people and like planning it out and everything. But I have found it difficult sometimes, like during like meetings, especially being like, I don't know, like a newbie and everyone. That was the hardest thing. One of the hardest things is I would be put into all these meetings like right when I started about things I had no idea what they were talking about. I was like so out of the loop. I was like, what is going on? And even now I'm still like so confused in meetings sometimes. But I would say my advice is, I feel like group projects are like a very good opportunity to kind of learn those project management like skills and time management skills of knowing how to like plan out a project and brainstorming ideas. Like I find it so hard now, like brainstorming ideas sometimes. I don't know why, but there's just like so many voices and so many people like shouting out ideas. I'm just like, what? It can be kind of hard. So just like taking the opportunity to really like brainstorm and like learning project timelines and that sort of thing, because you're right, Megan. So much of it is just like all these meetings and it can be so draining at times, especially like Zoom meetings. It's like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we prepare for how many times we have to discuss something before it actually becomes a reality. And then you've gone over it so many times that then once it's actually like produced, you're like a little bit over it sometimes, because you're like, I've spent so much time with it.
I agree. There's like so much like ramped up to that moment, and it's like it's so like drawn out. It can be exhausting for sure.
All right.
Any
I'm
other?
sorry. If anyone doesn't if no one has any other questions, I will pass it on to Megan for our closing announcements.
Well, thank you, Amy. By the way, thank you for a wonderful presentation and being so responsive and open to discussion. I feel like so many times in my undergrad career, I wish I would have attended more sessions like this and talked to people and really prepared myself or learned more things before I graduated college. So we really appreciate you coming back and being a person like that for students now.
Yes, for sure. It's been super fun. I like being back here.